This is Simple Podcast number 7 with me, Rémy Miller. And today we'll be discussing one of the books that sticks in my mind more often than others have recently, which is Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. Now, the full title is Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. So that's who we're learning about here today. And wow, what a read this is. It's quite the Bible. In total, it's got just about 750 pages. So if you pick this one up, it's definitely a time investment, but worth every second. And in fact, just like any well-written book, I think, you don't want it to get to the end once it's at the end. This version that I have here is the one with that seems to have come out after it won the Lincoln Prize. And I don't know if it's in the originals, but it has 2 sections in it that have photos in them, which is pretty nice. You can see actual photos of Abraham Lincoln and his children and other important people throughout the sequence of this book. And Abraham Lincoln is one of those figures that is kind of turned into this angel figure now that we're in current year as opposed to back when he existed, which is very interesting because he's immensely idolized, and you can think that only so much of that is true. Only so much of a man's legacy and character is true to reality, and how much of it was totally fabricated or just exacerbated by accident or on purpose. But reading through this book, it really makes it clear that, man, Abraham Lincoln was quite a good man. He was quite a good man, and yes, he had his faults, but frankly, not too many of them. It seemed like much of his troubles were internal as opposed to anything else, and didn't really advertise them too strongly or make them the problems of other people, or put that burden on other people also trying to solve the problem, because they have problems themselves trying to address whatever's going on. And his character is quite admirable, and more admirable than I had the whatever biased preconception I had of him. It was underwhelming compared to how good Abraham Lincoln was. So I would like to dive right in. From the book here. Unsurprisingly, Bates was initially reluctant to allow his name to be put forward as a candidate for president. I feel, though, in perfect bodily health, an indolence and indecision not common to me. Indolence meaning the avoidance of exertion or laziness. He conceded in July 1859. Quote, "The cause, I fear, is the mixing up of my name in politics. A large section of the Republican Party who think that Mr. Seward's nomination would ensure defeat are anxious to take me up, thinking that I would carry the Whigs and Americans generally. And I must try to resist the temptation and not allow my thoughts to be drawn off from the common channels of business and domestic cares. Ambition is a passion, at once strong and insidious, and is very apt to cheat a man out of his happiness and his true respectability of character." Now, this is something that I do heavily relate to. Ambition is a passion, and its nature of being for the good and for the bad, essentially, of you riding this coaster all the way up to its zenith with no penalty or getting cheated out of your happiness. And it reminds me of I'm not quite sure what to call it, a painting perhaps, that I got in a temple in Kyoto. And it has a Japanese character painted in black. It's beautifully illustrated. They're done by hand, and it's a Japanese character, and then they're in black, and then in gray, there's a gray circle that is the background of that, about the same size as the character. And what goes along with that was a little slip of paper that told you in Japanese and in English what it read, and it now hangs on my wall. And it reads, "I try always to be satisfied. I never have ambitions beyond my capacity." And it's a modest and beguiling thought indeed. To not want to refrain from social appointment. The reason of not knowing the reason of not knowing politics is not to say that it can't be learned. If you have the people's hearts, you'll find the right way. That's what I think in this situation. He was very skeptical of being, or very suspicious rather, of being cheated out of his happiness. But Bates was still in a sure position himself. So whether you think he should or shouldn't have gone into it, he definitely was in a position where he could have, and I think that's why so many people encouraged him. So it's this balance here. When do you know that something is a strong passion that will carry you through all the tides? And how do you know when crashing through all of those huge waves is just going to be an exercise in a total waste of time? This is something I think about frequently, especially because of conversations with people that I know, where it is about this balance between maintaining a driven mindset and sacrificing yourself, because there can definitely be much too much sacrifice when it comes to your physical health or mental health or relationships or anything. Any element in your life can be affected. So it's important to remain mindful of that. And I think as I age, I realize the importance of ensuring that progress at the same time as ensuring my leisure and making certain that I'm getting time in to do something like play an instrument or hang out with other people or do other, have these other social engagements, because, just for the sake of having them, because over time, if you are in this mindset of needing to think that you need to produce, that you need to create, that you need to fill your time with output instead of just input, that is totally valid thing to say. But of course, it can be overdone. It can most certainly be overdone, and it's easy to overdo, because it's easy to think, well, if I can just work a little harder, if I can get in more hours, then surely that's going to result in me progressing at a more favorable rate. And that's true, but it's also a matter of how long is the wick? How long is the wick? Because you can want to function like that, but eventually the sectors in life which are being neglected are going to wither and die and fall off like a leaf from an autumn tree. And the rotting progression happens slowly. So that's why it's important to be as mindful of it in the moment, listen to people, of course, add your own analysis and consideration on top of that of maybe what they're saying, because they're entirely different humans. So they're going to suggest something that they think is right, and it may be advice that they're giving to themselves, but that's what they're telling you, because we all do that. Advice reflects more the administrator of it than it does the recipient, because it's what's on our mind, and also recent tribulations we've went through. So again, it's really impossible to give any instruction in this area of what to do, because Once it enters the balance zone, the middle gray zone, that's when individuals have to begin creating resolutions for themselves rather than looking to external sources. It's the right answers and the difficult answers which we can't Google. Moving on here, back to the book. There was little to lead one to suppose that Abraham Lincoln, nervously rambling the streets of Springfield that May morning, who scarcely had a national reputation, certainly nothing to equal any of the other three, who had served but a single term in Congress, twice lost bids for the Senate, and had no administrative experience whatsoever, would become the greatest historical figure of the 19th century. And that's how one of the beginning chapters ends, because we think about these things. Is it luck? Or is it being an outsider, in his case, to the political machine, which granted him such clarity and intensity to his presidential administration? And clarity, intensity there in quotes, because she mentions that in the previous paragraph where she says, Lincoln was not a complete unknown to his rivals. By 1860, his path had crossed with each of them in different ways. Seward had met Lincoln 12 years before at a political meeting. The two shared lodging that night, and Seward encouraged Lincoln to clarify and intensify his moderate position on slavery. Lincoln had met Bates briefly and had sat in the audience in 1847 when Bates delivered his mesmerizing speech at the River and Harbor Convention. Chase had campaigned for Lincoln and Republicans in Illinois in 1858, though the two men had never met. So this is one of those things, again, that I'm learning more recently, is that the more successful people will have larger networks. And that's both by accident and by design. Because when you have someone like Lincoln who again doesn't have the best CV to go out applying to become president at the moment, still has this immense web of connections and relationships that he's built up over the years. And those add up really over time. They add up significantly. So that's one thing that I'm attempting to improve at, is increasing my level of my number of connections, because like I want to mention how I described it as being both the cause and the result in the way, because it is the people that put themselves out there more often and talk to more people and relate to them that allow them to establish more relationships and therefore have a more supportive community around them. So when somebody else needs help, they can be there to support that person, which means that later on, when you need help, there will be people there to support you. And it's the cause because it is the people that are more, I suppose, gregarious in that way that will gain that benefit. But then it's also a positive feedback loop because that's what it is, having those people that makes you successful. So being successful is defined both by gaining those connections, and also getting those connections makes you, it just works. It works both ways, essentially, is what I'm trying to say. So that's why it's important to have that. And that's why it's a cliche in movies when somebody says, "Oh, I know a guy," right? Or you know, someone calls in a favor. That's what that is because this successful person, maybe he's successful for something good or possibly bad. Sometimes it's the villain that says, "I know a guy." But ultimately, it's because they built up their connections. How? Building relationships, appealing to people, knowing what is in the heart. Knowing what is in the heart of the person you're speaking to. What is it they want and desire and long for? Those are the important elements. And that's one benefit of reading. is that you are able to buy for a small price the perspective of people much different than yourself. And in so doing, allow yourself to perspective take. You're just perspective taking all the time, which means that when you meet someone new, you will have that shred much more of experience and of knowledge to be able to relate to this person. Accepting the blatant fact that you might have read the same book and so can relate on a direct experience like that, you can at least take what it is that you know that's a combination of everything that you've read and relate with those, even with the thinnest of webs, to what that person cares about. So it's very essential to read for a lot of reasons, and one of them is to be able to relate to people more. Talking about relating to people, this is something that again speaks to me, and perhaps because this book is about America, not in its infancy, but the United States is certainly very young here at this period of time in the 16th presidency. So this is a Frenchman writing about Americans in America, and he says that, quote, "Every American is eaten up with the longing to rise," unquote. Tocqueville wrote. These 4 men and thousands more were not searching for a mythical pot of gold at the edge of a western rainbow, but for a place where their dreams and efforts could carve them a place in a fast-changing society. And I think that's what the United States feels today, is a fast-changing society, for many reasons, of course, and perhaps everyone everywhere feels that it's fast-changing, and that's just because we're living it. And when we're living it, it seems like the time that we're in now, of course, will last forever. But of course, that's never the case and never has been even close to the case, because the present moment has already passed. So that lends to this speed. But that longing to rise never sets, really. And it is kind of a disease which taints us with the condition of being always first, I think, for better or worse. And I say always, I don't mean to speak in absolutes, but in many times. So it is in fact an honor to our forefathers whose ambitions and accomplishments define my life of privilege. Because of the work they've done, I have the life I have now, and despite any problems or complications in contemporary society, I live in the top 1% of the top 1% of all humans to have ever existed. And it's a little hard to bring that down to the everyday scale, but I still feel pretty grateful for that. And and I think it is very simply written. I think it's a good line because it's simply written and also clearly it's eaten up with the longing to rise. And that is sometimes what it feels like throughout my daily life, eaten up by it. Like even if I would detriment from making progress of some sort, I do it anyway. Even if I'm already getting less than a full night's sleep, I go ahead on with the next task, and it's not okay, because that longing to rise means that we do something like get first to the moon, but it also means that we're quick to commit atrocities the United States has committed on multiple occasions. So it is that swiftness in our movement which definitely works to our benefit and detriment, but sometimes gives me the motivation to continue on with making something out of my temporary time on this terrain. Back to the book here. When the bishop was made president of Cincinnati College, Chase accompanied his uncle to Cincinnati. At 13, he was enrolled as a freshman at the college. The course of study was not difficult, leaving boys time to indulge in, quote, a good deal of mischief and fun, unquote. Salmon Chase was not among them. Quote, I had little or nothing to do with these sports, unquote, he recalled. Quote, I had the chores to do at home, and when I had time, I gave it to reading, unquote. Even Chase's sympathetic biographer, Robert Warden, observed that his, quote, life might have been happier, quote, had he, quote, studied less and had more fun, unquote. These early years witnessed the development of the rigid, self-denying habits that throughout his life prevented Chase from fully enjoying the companionship of others. Now, it is through Lincoln, as well as the other characters in the book, that I relate. This is Chase here, and this really points to something that, for me, I need to keep a close eye on. Because my nature is very much oriented towards the output side, we'll say. Which means if you're trying to output, you're likely trying to be efficient and proficient in it. Which means that you develop certain habits or routines or procedures which will make those productions go by more smoothly. And those routines and regiments and rules can take over. A certain amount of them are necessary. We've all met people with too few rules and procedures in their life that just really fall into an oblivion of waste. And I have some very personal experiences of that, of people that I have witnessed have that decline or plateau in that region. And I can say from firsthand experience in that respect that it is those people which do not end up ultimately and entirely content with their station in life. So that's why some amount are certainly necessary. Hard work pays off, but it also must be paid for to have. The price is undeniably disagreeable, and to some this does not matter. To others, it is repulsive, and others still, like Lincoln, find a way around it and still end up in the company of greatness. So that's the rub about it, is that you can still have your cake and eat it too, because hard work isn't just about getting in work. It's about setting up your life so that you are at balance. That's what hard work is. And balance is hard work. So just because you're in output production mode does not mean that you're working hard. Because what's the status of the other areas of your life? Are your relationships falling apart because you're in the office too much? Are you constantly getting pushed the conversation regarding your raise constantly getting pushed back because you're slacking at work, because you have some project at home that you're working on and you're overly involved in the relationships of others and draining your energy and time? What are these different areas that are drawing your energy and in what proportions? So it is hard work to look at all those categories and say, I'm doing too much here and too little there. This is how I'm going to reroute my energy. That is hard work. And that is something I've certainly had to work on over time, is how am I going to reroute my mental and physical resources in order to please the people I need to please and please myself to a sufficient degree. It's not an easy path, but one worth every joule of energy expended. Okay, back to the book here. Apprenticed in a blacksmith shop at 8 years old, with only a few years of formal schooling behind him, he had fought to educate himself. This is Thurlow Weed, by the way. He had walked miles to borrow books, studying history and devouring newspapers by firelight. A classic example of a self-made man, he no sooner identified an obstacle to his progress than he worked with discipline to counteract it. Concerned that he lacked a native facility for remembering names and appointments, and believing that, quote, a politician who sees a man once should remember him forever, unquote, Weed consciously trained his memory. He spent 15 minutes every night telling his wife, Catherine, everything that happened to him that day, everyone he had met, and exact words spoken. The nightly mnemonics worked, for Weed soon became known as a man with a phenomenal recall. Gifted with abundant energy, shrewd intelligence, and a warm personality, he managed to carve out a brilliant career as a printer, editor, writer, publisher, and eventually as powerful political boss, familiarly known as the Dictator. And it is again characteristics described as these that really make me want to live up to things like this. To train yourself to do something, and then in combination with both your talents and your gifts, going on to have a brilliant career, and printer, editor, writer, publisher, political boss. That sounds like a pretty good track. I think I would enjoy that very much. And it also goes to show that no ability or skill is untrainable. All competencies come with practice. Now, of course, your proclivities will determine what your beginning point of practice is, because whether all great writers have put in lots of hard work and have achieved a lot by writing a certain amount every day and becoming better at the practice and producing more. But every great writer also has the genes for being a great writer, or publisher, or political boss, or cobbler, or luthier, or anything you do. There are certain genes. Some people have those genes. It's a combination of the two factors, and that's how you become great, because any person can become great. See, I think this is the false idol that's sold here to people, especially in the United States, is that you can do anything. That's not true. If I said, you know what, I'm going to dedicate my life to being an Olympic weightlifter, not happening. Can't do it. So you know what? I got to find where my genes, what in my genes is pointing me in what direction, and then following that. And usually people enjoy what they're good at. So when you're good at something, that means that you can identify in the activity where your deficiencies are in order for you to remedy those and also work on your strengths. You have a higher awareness during some task when it means you have skill at it. So that also probably means that you'll enjoy it too, because it appeals to the hunter-gatherer sense at the core of all of us, which is you throw a spear and you hit the buffalo. So you have some tool that you can use to solve a problem, in this case your hunger. You have a target that represents this unresolved problem within you, mentally or physically, and then you aim at it, and then you hit the bullseye. And it's that target seeking and that marksmanship in a way, which really defines how people improve at something. So it's important to keep that in mind, because when you want to improve in something, you have to identify the target, because it's difficult to know what is it to improve at something, but it's identifying that target. So moving on, back to the book. Lincoln's dedication to internal improvements and economic development was given strength, nourishment, and power, so the historian Gabor Borit persuasively argues by his passionate commitment, quote, to the ideal that all men should receive a full, good, and ever-increasing reward for their labors so that they might have the opportunity to rise in life, unquote. Economic development provided the basis, Lincoln said much later, that would allow every American, quote, an unfettered start and a fair chance in the race of life, unquote. To Lincoln's mind, the fundamental test of a democracy was its capacity to, quote, elevate the condition of men, to lift artificial weights from all shoulders, to clear the path's laudable pursuit for all, unquote. A real democracy would be a meritocracy where those born in the lower ranks could rise as far as their natural talents and discipline might take them. Now, of course, that's a lofty view and something that we wish could be true 100% of the time for all people, which, of course, it is not. But it is certainly something to strive for. And I think it's good to set something up like that so we know, so we have a yardstick against which to measure our progress. We know how far, we can see how far from the goal we are. And by such, we can come to understand where our deficiencies are. The ultimate moral behavior of any individual to the community, local and global, is to elevate, is to unencumber, and to clear the paths to flourishing, which some people are unfortunate enough to require in the first place. So, which is to say that it's unfortunate that people have to be granted this concept, be granted this ability, rather than being given it by default and simply having to put in the work to make it a reality. It's more so something that you have to be in the right place at the right time to benefit from. Otherwise, you're screwed. Essentially, not you're screwed. You can there in every instance there's the opportunity to really gain the appreciation for what it is you have. It was in the book About Face by David Hackworth, where I was actually just talking about this today with a friend, where he's this very well respected Army colonel that fought during the Korean and Vietnam Wars, primarily what he's where he did his major work. And he, at one point during the Korean War in a horrible winter, had a beautiful idea of giving himself a $1 million wound in order for him to be returned home, leave the front lines. And what happened? Well, he tried to blow his leg off, essentially. He wanted to disassemble his and not only wanted to, but went through the steps of doing it, disassembled his grenade, got the gunpowder that was inside of it, put that in the hole, and he was going to ignite that as to incapacitate his leg. And as he was doing that, guess what happened? He saw the sunrise. And that was simply enough to him to not blow off his leg with a $1 million wound. He thought of this idea because the Chinese often thought of doing that, of rigging foxholes and such. So it could have happened, but he did not. Back to the book. The philosophical and legal arguments Chase had advanced, however, were considered so important by the anti-slavery community that they were printed in pamphlet form and distributed throughout the nation. Now, this was based on that excerpt right there was based on Chase, on Salmon Chase, and he had just spoken, and what he said was just so noteworthy that that's what happened, that these pamphlets were distributed throughout the nation. And it really makes you think that it makes every action count, because ceremonious victories are not the only vessel of change. You don't need to have these big fanfares in order for something to progress over time. Beware of being totally steadfast, because not playing the game when necessary could cause ceremonious defeat and retreat. Which is to say, kind of always be aware, always have your eyes out, your eyes peeled, of situations in which you can use the lever of success, and you can apply a little bit of force and get more maximal of a result. Because things like this happen. Opportunities come along, and the more I read about the life of people I admire and people I think that are generally considered successful on one axis or another, they all have this element of capitalizing on happenstance. It's the serendipitous moments which we claim as our own, which really bring us to success in the end. Right? And it's being on top of your game at all times. Clearly, he was on top of his game at this moment. And if he gave some kind of trash speech here, or just the words coming out of his mouth weren't incredibly eloquent, it didn't really capture the people there, definitely it wouldn't have been recorded in the pamphlet. And you know what? He would have had less national awareness. And then that would have been, that's one additional step to getting closer to running for president, which is what Salmon Chase is trying to do at this time, or maybe not at this time, but he was always kind of scheming. He even when he was officially a cabinet member in the Lincoln administration, he was still scheming for president. He was still trying to get trying to ride off Lincoln's momentum into the presidential chair. And eventually, I don't know if I have it notated later on in the book, but that is what ultimately got him fired, essentially, because he was scheming later on, and Chase would do something that was obviously working in his own favor so he could set himself up for the presidency after Lincoln left. And then he would kind of get ousted for it, and he would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And he would write a letter of resignation to Lincoln and say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for this. I feel obligated to resign." And then Lincoln on 3 occasions said no, because the president could say no, this is, you can chill out here. You can chill out here. You don't have to resign over this. So Lincoln did that 3 times, even for kind of some minor and some major offenses, of just total kind of breaches of trust and just general respect. And then on the 4th time that Chase wrote that letter of resignation without expectation of it being fulfilled, just for him to save face essentially, Lincoln said, "No, not happening," and accepted his resignation. So Lincoln definitely had an immense patience, but there is only so much that you can meddle with a man before it just becomes straight up disrespect that you can get away with. So back here to the book, the time had come, Chase decided, to try for public office. Though he had not been active in party politics, he sought a nomination from the Whig Party to the state Senate. To his disappointment, he was rebuffed as an abolitionist. 3 years later, he tried again, seeking the Whig nomination for the Cincinnati City Council. Although he succeeded in gaining office, he was defeated for re-election after a single term, largely due to his position on temperance, which had led to unpopular votes denying liquor licenses to city establishments. So that's like here, maybe if he relaxed his tolerance on other topics like temperance, which is the abolition of alcohol, banning alcohol, he could have continued to support abolition with the strength of influence of his council spot. If Schindler called Hitler an asshole, his list wouldn't have been an impressive length. If he was even able to start it to begin with, which is to say that you sometimes have to sacrifice one small bad for a much greater good. And even though he didn't believe that alcohol should be consumed willy-nilly by the public population, if he relaxed a little bit on that topic, he would have been able to gain the favor of the council and make maneuvers on a topic that was more important to him, which was the abolition of slavery, not potable ethanol, And that really puts in perspective to you how it's so essential to really weigh your options. In short, weigh your options and think about, what would it be like to make this move right now, and what would the consequences be? How would the consequences of this decision line up with the consequences of some other decision later on? And then flip it. Instead of going with option A, and instead going with option B, what would it be like? What would it be like to do option B first and then have option A as the backup? How would those overlapping influences of consequences and intent lend to the situation? And so that's something that maybe he was thinking about a lot and still decided to pursue his view on temperance, but perhaps it was something else. And perhaps he could have went for the greater good, essentially. Back to the book here. The Democratic Illinois State Register charged that, which was a magazine or publication of some sort, charged that Lincoln had disgraced his district in his, quote, treasonable assault upon President Polk, unquote, claimed that, quote, henceforth, unquote, he would be known as, quote, Benedict Arnold, unquote, and predicted that he would enjoy only a single term. Lincoln sought to clarify his position, arguing that although he had challenged the instigation of the war, he had never voted against supplies for the soldiers. To accept Polk's position without question, he claimed, was to, quote, allow the president to invade a neighboring nation whenever he may choose to say he deems it necessary, unquote. So this is something that happened a lot with Lincoln, is that people really said that he said one thing when in fact he said something entirely different. So he didn't, I believe this was in reference to the Mexican War at this time, and he was saying that he didn't think that we should be going to this Mexican War, that we were just causing more trifle with neighboring countries when we shouldn't need to. He still said, you know what, even though I don't agree in that fight, that doesn't mean that the soldiers have to suffer. So it's kind of like one of those things where just because you don't agree with an order doesn't mean that you don't carry it out. If you're thinking about yourself in an organization and someone makes the call up above to carry out something, and it's not something that's just morally reprehensible or illegal or unethical or anything like that, but it's just one that you generally disagree with, it doesn't matter at that point, because you either disagree with the order and choose not to carry it out and try and explain that to others and hopefully up the chain where they can understand that, or you carry it through as if it is your own plan. That's what you do at that point. And that's kind of what's going on here, where he doesn't agree that we should be going to war, but that doesn't mean he's going to say, that doesn't mean he's not going to support the decision once it's made. And Lincoln was a vestige of time, past, present, and future, who advocated for fairness as an ongoing principle rather than a single-use tool to aid his personal ambitions. So in this situation, he was still being fair to the problem. He was not trying to, based on his personal agenda, deprive all other, options being pursued as something unworthy. Which is, I think, what people look out for in a human, and what someone will definitely enjoy. Will somebody enjoy the benefit of as someone you work for in an organization of any kind. I don't mean a corporate or business organization. An organization could be a family, or it could be a group of friends, or a volunteer group, or a band. It's all about the fairness and treatment in all situations. That's something that I've been reading about a lot. I'm actually reading through right now With the Old Breed by Eugene Sledge, and that is something that has been continually instilled in me in that book, is that the most important feature in having a cohesive group of people is compassion. It's to care for others, and it's to care for others as yourself, or maybe even more than yourself. Probably even more than yourself, definitely even more than yourself. Because yourself is a community. And I think this is the way that Jordan Peterson describes it, where you can think about yourself in the present moment, but you are also yourself tomorrow, and the year after that, and the decade after that. So you, in the present moment, are a community over time. And that's just one person. So now you think of everybody else. You're living a community not only the size of what you see, but a size infinitely larger that you can't even understand. And how much these lives and this community is going to change over time. So that's something that you have to be very mindful of as you make any action or say anything. So, moving on to the book here. I won't go through this whole situation of what this quote is, but essentially what it boils down to is this kind of final quote right here at the end of the paragraph. And this is something that Lincoln said. Lincoln, so disappointed but realistic in his appraisal of the situation, Lincoln never introduced his bill. Quote, finding that I was abandoned by my former backers and having little personal influence, unquote, he said, quote, I dropped the matter, knowing it was useless to prosecute the business at that time, unquote. And this was in reference to slavery and how zealous of an opinion he was going to have on it at the moment. And because the public opinion of slavery was changing so much based on the time and on the population and on the location, he was sometimes more successful than others at advocating this idea of his. And what's beautiful about Lincoln is that he knew when to stop. It's important to say don't quit. That's a good motto to have, but that doesn't mean never quit on your pursuit of something. That means never quit on your path to making that come to fruition. So if that means you have to pump the brakes a little in order to achieve that long-term goal, then that's what you do. And so playing the game can also come in the form of taking a timeout and resuming at a later time. Back to the book here again. Before he returned to Springfield, the former flatboatman applied to patent a method of lifting boats over shoals and bars by means of inflatable, buoyant chambers. Unfortunately, no analogous device existed to refloat a political career run aground. His securely Whig congressional district had turned Democratic, a shift many Whigs blamed on Lincoln's criticisms of the war. He was out of office with little immediate prospect of return. Assessing his brief congressional tenure, there was little to celebrate. His term, John Nicolai wrote, quote, added practically nothing to his reputation, unquote. He had been a diligent congressman, making nearly all the roll calls and serving his party faithfully, but his efforts to distinguish himself, to make a mark, had failed. All these disappointments notwithstanding, Lincoln had forged relationships and impressed men who would contribute significantly to his future success. With Caleb Smith of Indiana and Joshua Giddings of Ohio, Westerners whose political careers were similar to his. So that's what it is, man. Always on the game. Just like early in the book, how we were talking about, you always got to be on the game because even if you don't, and that's a real struggle. It's real easy to feel like we are in a rut. We could be in a rut. And we could think that we are being entirely unproductive and we are not doing what we should be doing because we're just doing the same thing over and over again. And it doesn't feel like it feels like we're walking on a treadmill as opposed to on the ground, you know, and we're not getting anywhere, and that can make us feel useless. But that is where I think having strong principles comes into play, because then you can look at your own life principles and think, okay, according to these, am I doing what I should? Am I doing what I am supposed to be doing? And I think we can certainly say Lincoln is a man of his principles and of very astute ones, and yeah, know that when you are following your principles, that something good is coming out of it. It might not feel like that in the moment, but at the same time, you can be setting yourself up for future greatness. So know that you're doing well, if you're doing well, and when you're doing well, and be sure to keep in mind that it is all for something and not for nothing. Sometimes it is the people rather than the situation which should be capitalized upon. There is advantage to be gained at every moment. So the matter becomes selecting the right target of intent. And at this point, maybe it was more important for Lincoln to be establishing these relationships with people that had similar career goals as his, to have a mutually supported environment later on, instead of him trying to become the next big suit in serving in office. So back to the book here. Frances found the speech greatly disappointing. The word compromise, she told her sister, is becoming hateful to me. Acknowledging that Webster is a forcible speaker, particularly when he extolled the Union, she found him much less eloquent than Henry Clay because his heart is decidedly colder. People must have feeling themselves to touch others. Despite such criticisms, the speech won nationwide approval from moderates who desperately wanted a peaceful settlement of the situation. So that's the part that I highlighted there, which is people must have feeling themselves to touch others. Enthralling others follows knowing others, which follows only from knowing oneself, and how tears are brought in smiles and frowns. So kind of divorce of the context there on the page, that is what I was thinking about by that simple description of characters. People must have feeling themselves to touch others. And that is critical to remember when you're trying to have any influence over anybody ever. whether that's to get a friend to go to the restaurant that you happen to want to go to that night because you're particularly passionate about, that's just what's on your palate that night. Or it could be in a more formal business setting. You never know. And it is that influence which is going to get you far. I recently, it's something that kind of occurs to me periodically over time I kind of get surprised by the variety of books that catch my attention. And they're books to me that only a few short years ago, maybe if you say 5 years ago, you said, hey, could you imagine yourself buying this book later on and getting into it and learning from it? I would have said no. I recently was at a bookstore and I never really leave a bookstore empty-handed. This time I got 2 books. One of them was, I'm unsure who it's by, but it's called The 12 Cliches of Selling and Why They Actually Work. And I'm excited to get into that book because selling is, what does selling mean? It means that you and the other person agree about something. When it comes to selling in a business sense, it means that you have a product or service that you want another person to pay for. And that person has to agree that it would be beneficial to the both of you for the customer to be paying for that product or service. And at the core of what is there is, how do people agree? How do we get to how do we arrive at the same conclusion, and how do we conduct a negotiation such that every person benefits at the end? That's what a successful negotiation is. And we're negotiating always in our lives, with ourselves and with others. And if we can't be reasonable as well as resistant, to be agreeable as well as stubborn, without, again, striking that balance, we are going to be forlorn in our lives for not accomplishing what we truly aim to be. So that's why something like selling is important, because you can learn from it in that way. Now back to the book here. It will be of great advantage to you to cultivate a noticing habit, he advised. Accustom yourself to talk of what you see and to write details, and in conversational and even narrative style. There's the greatest possible difference in charm between the same narrative told by one person and by another. No doubt a large part of this difference is to be ascribed to constitutional differences of temperament, but any intelligent person can greatly increase facility and apprehension and expression by careful self-culture. The ascetic refrain of Chase's instruction to Kate is that an effort of will can surmount most obstacles, and self-denial can lead to its own gratifications. I know you do not like writing. You can overcome. You can overcome if you will. I dislike, for example, to bathe myself all over with cold water in the morning, especially when the thermometer is so low as at present. But I find I can, when I determine to do so, overcome my feeling of dislike and even substitute a certain pleasurable sensation. So this is literally discipline right here. And this is, one of the first highlights we looked at was this rigid, self-denying attitude. And I feel like even out of a book of 750 pages, they'll have learned many lessons. And I think I counted, I think I've counted the amount of sticky flags that I have sticking out the top of my team of rivals. I believe it's at 63. Out of all 63 of those, you can say you learned so much from a book, even when you're actively reading, but maybe I'm just on the low end of the curve when it comes to memory and recall or smartness, but it's usually one thing that sticks out to me in a book. It's one thing. And to me, and it's not necessarily the most important thing of the book, but maybe the most important to you. and maybe the only the most important to you at that time, but I think it was Chase's rigid and self-denying. That's what I think of a lot. Am I being rigid and self-denying right now? Making an honest evaluation of that, and then going forward. But this is literally discipline right here. Back to what Chase is in a letter talking to his daughter about his daughter Kate, which was actually quite a political figure back then, which is especially notable because, of course, she's a woman, and that was not common at that time. But she was just as, if not more, competent than many of the other political figures, gender, sex notwithstanding. But anyway, it's not a stunning example of how to speak to your children, I think. And he seems to be described as being a man of not being a man of utmost enjoyment of the times of a person to spend time with. And apparently this self-rigor says nothing about character necessarily, because as I mentioned before, Chase was not an upstanding human when he tried to take advantage of the people he worked closest with in order to gain personal advantage. So it depends on what you measure. This is one of those instances where you say, oh, he was successful and he had this trait. How are you measuring that success? How are you measuring it? So, back to the book here. At this juncture, some have suggested, Lincoln was sustained by his wife's unflagging belief that a glorious destiny awaited him. She had the fire, will, and ambition, his law partner John Stuart observed. When Mary was young and still being courted by many beaux, she had told a friend who had taken an old, wealthy husband, I would rather marry a good man, a man of mind, with a hope and bright prospects ahead for position, fame and power, than to marry all the houses, gold and bones in the world. Stephen Douglas, who had been among her suitors, she considered a very little giant by the side of my tall Kentuckian, and intellectually my husband towers above Douglas just as he does physically. Quite simply, in Mary's mind, her husband had no equal in the United States. That's quite an impressive thing to say, no equal. Mary, by the way, is Lincoln's wife, who I don't think we'll really take a look at later in the book, because I'm usually highlighting when it's something to learn from. But Mary, over time, became exceptionally mentally unstable. And this was largely brought about by the death of her children. The two of them had, if I recall, 5 children together. I don't know if that's exactly true, but I believe 5. And I believe only 2 of which survived. The Lincoln family had a lot of tragedy in it, from just children dying, which is not okay. And that kind of sent her into I don't know if it was manic depressive. Of course, we don't really know back then, but just very not able to handle herself, and which might be one thing that contributed to Lincoln's success, is because he was able to put in a lot of long hours, because he couldn't take it being at home while she was, raving about the place in a huge fit and getting angry and yelling and stuff like that. So he ended up just staying at the office and working there for long hours and really only returning home to eat and sleep. And who knows? Perhaps that's what contributed to his success. Again, for better or worse, that's an unfortunate situation to be in, where the selected human of your life is not accessible in ways that are supportive. So, I think with good intent of heart and mind, failure is only a temporary obstruction. In other words, everyone, at least the ones of any worth, prefer a good man before a good businessman. And of course, the two aren't mutually exclusive. But I think conceptually speaking, that is what is at play. is choosing that substance, the content of character over display of accomplishment. Because I think after all, it is that display of accomplishment which is the most elusive. We can trick ourselves into thinking that a person is worth it because of what we see. But that's not always the case. After all, humbleness is subtle for a reason. So that's why it's important to remain as vigilant to that as possible. Back to the book here. Douglas understood, this is the Stephen Douglas that we just mentioned, from the outset that his primary goal, more important than debating or defining his own position, was to cast Lincoln as a radical, bent on abolishing all distinctions between the races. The question of black equality in the modern sense was not so controversial in Illinois or in the nation as a whole. Almost every white man was against it, and even most abolitionists. Douglas was certain that no candidate who professed a belief in the social or political equality of blacks and whites could possibly carry Illinois, where a long-standing set of black laws prevented blacks from voting, holding political office, giving testimony against whites, and sitting on juries. So it was these abhorrent black laws which endured for so long, which began an era not yet finished that systematically and governmentally allowed whites to do as they please with no fear of retribution. And part of these laws, it's these black laws. It's by saying no blacks can sit on jury, because so what does that mean in an everyday situation? That means that a white person can go, let's say, to an area where there are only blacks. There are no white people around here, and a black person gives him a nasty look, perhaps. So this white man goes over, doesn't like the look on this man's face, and beats him to death. And what's going to happen? Well, if he's in an area where there are only blacks around and only black people saw it, then he's getting away scot-free, totally scot-free, because black people can't sit on juries. There's nothing about a black person's perspective which is lawfully or governmentally supported in any way at this period in time. So what you're getting is a large immunity from prosecution based on skin color. And if yours happens to be lighter than others, then you have that privilege. So of course that devolved into even worse things over time, like putting law enforcement in area, discriminating between white and black areas of how you're going to conduct law enforcement and what crimes you're going to select for to detain people for, and what's the severity, and because law enforcement is choosing what to enforce because it's people doing it. So and laws. So it is really those black laws which set the groundwork for a not totally emergent nature of the distinction between the races in the United States. Back to the book here. I think this one has to be a little bit of a long one, just to get the full context. Though he retained much of his Cooper Union speech, Lincoln developed a new metaphor in Hartford to perfectly illustrate his distinction between accepting slavery where it already existed while doing everything possible to curtail its spread, and to take a pause here, that was something that was common in this time, even with Lincoln, because he knew his audience. He knew he couldn't say, let's get you slavery. Do we need them? Get rid of it. He wanted to, you couldn't just come out and say, get rid of slavery, because that was literally what the opponents were doing. That was just the highlight we looked at, where we had people trying to cast Lincoln's opinion as being a totally radical lack of acknowledging a difference between the races. And back then, you were done for if that was your opinion. You were too far progressed. So it wasn't going to happen. So that was the balance that Lincoln was trying to strike in that moment. Back to the book. Testing his image in Hartford, he would refine it further in subsequent speeches. If I saw a venomous snake crawling in the road, Lincoln began, any man would say I might seize the nearest stick and kill it. But if I found that snake in bed with my children, that would be another question. I might hurt the children more than the snake, and it might bite them. And if there was a bed newly made up to which the children were to be taken, and it was proposed to take a batch of young snakes and put them there with them, I take it to no man would say there was any question how I ought to decide. The new territories are the newly made bed to which our children are to go, and it lies with the nation to say whether they shall have snakes mixed up with them or not. The snake metaphor acknowledged the constitutional protection of slavery where it legally existed, while harnessing the protective instincts of parents to safeguard future generations from the venomous expansion of slavery. This homely revision of the territories as beds for American children exemplified what James Russell Lowell described as Lincoln's ability to speak as if people were listening to their own thinking out loud. When Seward reached for a metaphor to dramatize the same danger, he warned that if slavery were allowed into Kansas, his countrymen would have introduced the Trojan horse into the territory. So the thing is here that the Trojan horse imagery didn't carry, as she says, the instant accessibility of Lincoln's snake in the bed story, nor its memorable originality. And it's really true. If you're saying, oh, there's a freshly made bed over there, and what we're going to do is it's night time for the kids, but before we read them a bedtime story, we're going to put venomous snakes in the bed. And that's what it's like to allow slavery into newly acquired territories. And that's something that I've been trying to acquire more so recently, is this trying to describe things as if people were listening to their own thinking out loud. And how you do that is you craft the simplest analogies that you can to the most everyday mundane things. And that's what allows people to have this accessibility. A Trojan horse is using the Trojan horse's imagery is almost academic in a way. How are you going to find something that people interact with on a daily basis and massage that into an analogy, into an example that people instantly relate to, and therefore make it more possible that they're going to agree with your statement? So this may exceed in value to Hitchens' maxim of good language, saying that the best compliment is feeling personally addressed. But I am referring to Christopher Hitchens here, by the way. But listening to one's own thoughts is gravely compelling. Analogies should match that of everyday encounters. So what I mean here is that Christopher Hitchens is another great writer that died recently. I believe in December 2011, something like that, and that was one of his maxims, that the best compliment he gave and what he tried to teach in when he was teaching writers was that it is the greatest compliment to say that they felt personally addressed in your writing, and that you should speak as you write. Sorry, you should write as you speak, but ensure that how you speak is how people are entertained. If people can't find your style of oration and speaking in general very relatable or very engaging, then your writing isn't going to be any better off. It's not like writing and speaking are two entirely different things. They are to some degree, but it's definitely more so going to be the case that if you can hook people in your speech and that people want to listen to you and give you the space to speak, then they want to listen to you, then your writing is going to be better. They're going to want to listen to you as much as they are going to read from you. Back to the book here. Chance, positioning, and managerial strategy all played a role in Lincoln's victory. Still, if we consider the comparative resources each contender brought to the race, their range of political skills, their emotional, intellectual, and moral qualities, their rhetorical abilities, and their determination and willingness to work hard, it is clear that when the opportunity beckoned, Lincoln was the best prepared to answer the call. His nomination, finally, was the result of his character and his life experiences. These separated from his rivals and provided him with advantages unrecognized at the time. Having risen to power with fewer privileges than any of his rivals, Lincoln was more accustomed to rely upon himself to shape events. Maybe, I'm thinking, this explains why many successful people have disadvantaged histories, because broke people with no support have only their own work to shape their future. This independent, commandeering mindset has them do something to want something. So there is this sense that when there is some type of convenience that you want to gain from, you have to set it up for you to have that. And it comes down to exactly as Jocko puts it, discipline equals freedom. You have to put in another way I've heard it is that discipline is pain in the present and regret is pain in the future. So do you want to deal, you're getting pain either way. Do you want the pain now or do you want the pain later? And what comes along with the pain now and later? What's coming along with that? There is this delay of gratification that is characteristic to successful people, and I've talked about it before. Which is you can identify in very young children. Only you can really start in their critical period, I reckon, and starting at about the age of 3, perhaps, where you just put a marshmallow in front of them and you say, you can eat this now or you can wait and you can get another later, and they gotta wait. And if they don't wait, that's one thing that I agreed on, that my girlfriend and I have agreed upon, is that if it is ever the case that we notice, we do this delay of gratification test, we do the marshmallow test, and our child does not show that delay of gratification, immediate intervention is necessary, because that is a really bad sign of someone who is going to give in to impulses flippantly throughout their life, and that's what they're set up for. So it's important to course correct when that happens. And it was clearly the case with Lincoln here too. Back to the book. Finally, Lincoln's profound and elevated sense of ambition, an ambition, Frauenbacher observes, notably free of pettiness, malice, and overindulgence, shared little common ground with Chase's blatant obsessions with office, Seward's tendency toward opportunism, or the ambivalent ambition that led Bates to withdraw from public office. Though Lincoln desired success as fiercely as any of his rivals, he did not allow his quest for office to consume the kindness and open-heartedness with which he treated supporters and rivals alike, nor alter his steady commitment to the anti-slavery cause. In the end, though the men who nominated Abraham Lincoln in Chicago may not have recognized all these qualities, they chose the best man for the supreme challenge looming over the nation. Now, the supreme challenge was slavery, and the nomination in Chicago was for his presidency. And that's when you know you're in for a journey, when you only get the presidency of the man of the book you're reading on about page 250 out of 750. That's how much backstory you're getting in this book. That's how much goodness you're getting, and it's really worth every page because you understand his character and what the characters of the surrounding people are like, and how balanced his decisions have to be in order to make the progress that he had. So every page of this book is worth reading. And it is, again, a characteristic for which I strive, is having this ambition free of pettiness, malice, and overindulgence. Man, that is really the whole package. Pettiness, malice, because with pettiness, that means that when you're on your path to success, you're not allowing the quabbles of other people to interfere with you. And when it's not filled with malice, that means that not only are you not letting those things get to you, but you're also not acting in any negative ways. You don't have these grudges against people, or these people, you try to get people back somehow, or you really house any heinous thoughts in your mind of these tinctures which interfere with your that interfere with your ambition. And overindulgence, that is of course a big one. I mean, we think of the people that have been greatly successful and great producers of great works and over time, and a lot of them have fallen to overindulgence of some sort or another. Of course, many of them is with drugs. Alcohol is of note over time. Other people get an overindulgence of fame. You know, these intangible things like fame. Of course, they come along with their tangible consequences and benefits and detriments. But that is more intangible thing. This popularity. So it is important. It is not important. It is possible to become intoxicated off the drink of any concept in excess. So the fact that he could do this without overindulgence is quite impressive, and a substantial contributor to Lincoln's success and his long list of positive relationships, in fact, is all of these qualities here. You don't create a support structure which suspends you at one level as you strive for the next by antagonizing people and letting them down. So what I mean to say there is that when you're trying to be successful, what's occurring is that you're having one foot on the rung of a ladder as you use it to push your other foot up to the next one. So you have a stable system below you that suspends you in time and space in a way which then allows you to use that as a sound foundation to push yourself upward. And that's what being successful is making sure that you have that backing there. And when you're not successful, that's probably occurring as a result of slippages. That you're aiming yourself up to achieve the next thing, but you're not actually making sure that if things go wrong, you'll still stay at the same position, because then you get into a one step back, one step forward type deal. And of course, that's not going to be that's not going to be helpful for your for your development. And in fact, will frustrate it. It will frustrate your development. So back to the book here. This is something that makes me think of some info years back I learned about. Back to the book. As the conversation was drawing to an end, Weed pointed out that the inclusion of Chase, Cameron, Wells, and Blair in the cabinet, along with Seward, Bates, and Smith, would give the Democrats a majority, slighting the Whigs, who made up the major portion of the Republican Party. And remember here that the Republican Party is the party that Lincoln is in, and that Whigs were essentially on the side of the Republicans. And so Lincoln filled his cabinet with Democrats who were in the majority. So the majority of the cabinet was people he disagreed with, people in the other party. Back to the book. You seem to forget, Lincoln replied, that I expect to be there. And counting me as one, you see how nicely the cabinet would be balanced and ballasted. Weed returned to Albany convinced that Lincoln was capable in the largest sense of the term. In the Albany Evening Journal, he wrote, his mind is at once philosophical and practical. He sees all who go there, hears all they have to say, talks freely with everybody, reads whatever is written to him, but thinks and acts by himself and for himself. And of course, that made me think that, which gave me a sense of pride, that Lincoln is a disagreeable giver. And I learned about this a while ago. I'm looking at my sticky flags here, and it's actually so funny because already I can see how sun-blanched these Post-its are. Like, I have these purple colored flags sticking up off the top of the book, and the portion that's been exposed to the exterior is a notably lighter shade than what has been tucked between the pages of the book. Which is kind of gratifying to think that I have that history built up there. So this makes me think that he's a disagreeable giver. He acts and thinks only in service to himself, also considering it part of his duty to mind others with extreme adroitness of personability, and sympathy. So this disagreeable giver term comes from this, it was a quiz I took a while ago from this person who came up with this system of, it's basically a Punnett square, of a 2x2 square, kind of 4 possibilities of what accurately describes your relationship with how much you're willing to concede with others and how much you're willing to and how much you're willing to act on your own behalf. And what makes great leaders, this person found, is having the personality type of disagreeable giver. Now a disagreeable taker is going to be something you want nothing to do with. That's going to be someone that you want to avoid at all costs. Disagreeable giver. So not only are they going to not want to give you the benefit of the doubt or want to let anything go your way, they're also going to be people that mooch off of others as much as they can. I've known disagreeable takers, and they're not pleasant people. And these are, at least in my experience, you want to be selective with the people that you spend the most amount of time with. And I've noticed that it is those type of people which spending a large amount of time with has sucked resources away from me being able to do the good that I want to do, to do the good that I want to do in the world. And so that's a disagreeable taker. An agreeable taker is going to be somebody who is almost two-faced in a way. They're going to get along with you, but at the same time, they're very opportunistic in a negative sense. When something comes up that's going to come to their benefit, they're going to take it. But they're also going to go along with you and make you think that you're A-okay. So not a person you want to be with so much. It is really the two and the grounds that are the most tolerant. So you take someone who is an agreeable giver. That's someone that can kind of be taken advantage of a lot. An agreeable giver. If you're always willing to put the other person before yourself, and at the same time as that, you're going to be the first to give rather than everything else. And I know agreeable givers, and that is definitely one of the problems that they have. If being an agreeable giver is your nature. And all of these, by the way, have their benefits and detriments. But the first two I mentioned, I think, are going to be more extreme. So yeah, being an agreeable giver is something that you have to guard very tightly, because it's something that can get out of hand, and then you end up being worst off out of a whole group of people because you're giving, and allowing others to possibly take advantage. Not possibly. There are people out there that are definitely going to want to take advantage. And if you're agreeably giving all the time, then that's a danger you have, and that you have to mitigate. What this person found, short story long, as the most capable leaders is the disagreeable giver. So this is somebody that is not going to be very willing to take something from them. You know, if you have a boss who's a disagreeable giver, they're not going to give in to the slightest sense of somebody else's whim or desire. But at the same time, so they may be hard to work with in that sense, but at the same time, they're incredibly not possessive. They're the disagreeable giver. So when they need to make sure that things are squared away in their own department and their own life and their own respects in general, whether this is personally or professionally or anything else, they're going to make sure that things are going their way. And as long as that's going on, they're going to want to give. They're going to want to give support or resources or anything else, in whatever form that may be. And I think that's when I took the test, that's the one that I came out on. So of course I do have some bias in that direction. And it was also kind of revelatory and supportive to hear that the disagreeable giver is what makes the best leader. And I think that's true, because that means that, hey, I'm not going to settle for no slack. I'm not going to make sure that we're going to slip into the abyss and be incompetent or anything like that. You know, if you think about it in a professional setting, but at the same time, you know, we're here to support each other. We're here to have a mutually good time and really build that compassion with other people, because it is through giving that you build relationships with others. It's not necessarily giving gifts or giving money. It could be about giving time or giving support or giving an ear or giving a hand. It's about those things. Back to the book here. Undaunted, Seward worked furiously to complete his plans for reinforcing Fort Pickens, hopeful that Lincoln might change his mind before the Fox expedition to Fort Sumter was launched. The previous day, he had sent urgent summons to Captain Montgomery Meigs to come to his house. Recognizing that time was short, Seward requested Meigs to put down upon paper an estimate and project for relieving and holding Fort Pickens, and to bring it to the presidents before 4 p.m. Lincoln was happy to receive the Army captain's report, though in his mind, reinforcing Pickens did not mean choosing between the two garrisons. Tell Scott, the president said, that I wish this thing done and not let it fail unless he can show that I have refused him something he asked for as necessary. I depend upon you gentlemen to push this thing through. And so he's just kind of in badass mode right now, and they should have deduced his passion regarding slavery. Even the soft and lovely man, you must take seriously his word. So, of course, Lincoln, the kind of picture of the character you get of him over all of this time is one of immense. I read about it being the method of the disagreeable giver, which he's certainly doing in this moment, is being the iron fist and the velvet glove, and that's kind of what it is. He's saying, I don't care what you have to do, get this done. And then he says, I don't want any excuses unless you can prove to me that I didn't do everything I could to allow you to do this. I didn't give you all the resources you asked for, and I didn't give you the time you said you needed, So I think that's important, is giving somebody an unconditional at the same time as giving them total support. You want them to think that you're on their team and you're on the same side, and you can certainly do that at the same time as requesting total adherence to your request. You certainly need a certain amount of leadership capital to be able to do that, but then it's also what concessions are you making in that request itself. So think about that as you're asking somebody to do something else. What have you done for them to make them want to do it? Back to the book here. In his farewell address, George Washington had given voice to this transcendent idea of union. It is of infinite moment, George Washington said, that you should properly estimate the immense value of your national union to your collective and individual happiness, that you should cherish a cordial, habitual, and immovable attachment to it, accustoming yourselves to think and speak of it as of the palladium of your political safety and prosperity. Foreseeing the potential for dissension, Washington advised vigilance against the first dawning of every attempt to alienate any portion of our country from the rest or to enfeeble the sacred ties which now link together the various parts. Crazy. So even even George Washington probably knew where this whole slavery thing was going, and tried to sprinkle some things in there, and really sold it by not trying to alienate any portion of our country from the rest, which is something that we want to say is a common feature in current year, where we're separating groups one from the other, and perhaps that has happened as an emergent property of political dissension in this era of wanting more political diversity in thought and identity. But this diversity and identity that's desired by the population has been around for a long time, long enough ago for the founders of this country to be saying that, and of course it's been said for thousands of years before that, because unity versus contempt for an outside force or outside people has been around for as long as we have. And who knew that I say here, who knew that my precise variety of a subscription to community was uttered by the first of presidents of the country I would commit my generosity. So what I mean by that is that it's important to understand your contribution as a matter of your individual and collective happiness. So what you do to fulfill yourself, to fulfill your meaning, is also going to have meaning to others. And it's just as important to make sure that your personal meaning is of enough value to take up your time and energy as it is to the entire collective in which you exist. Because again, back to the communities over time comment I made earlier. Yeah, you need to look out for that as a whole. Back to the book here. Agitated by the vituperative attacks by the British press, Seward burst into Lincoln's office on Sunday afternoon, December 15th. Orville Browning, who was taking tea with the president at the time, dismissed Seward's worries, insisting that England would not do so foolish a thing as to declare war. Lincoln was not so sure. He recalled a ferocious bulldog in his hometown. While neighbors convinced themselves that they had nothing to fear, one wise man observed, "I know the bulldog will not bite. You know he will not bite, but does the bulldog know he will not bite?" So I love this comment on just human nature here. And it is, again, those types of analogies which I look to understand and spot in real life and remember to regurgitate later on, because it is ones like those that are just so illustrative in the moment, and tell you. And it's really a matter of, do I know I'm weighing up the situation properly? And I like the reference to the bulldog here, because when you have something like an animal, something like a dog, you think of something that is capable of restraint, but also can exercise its viciousness at will. And it's about, do we actually understand this beast? So that's what they're talking about here. Despite the certainty which you hold, the situation, the independent variable, holds greater uncertainties. Your perception of a man is not by necessity commensurate with the man's perception of himself. And that's why you have to be careful of what people say as opposed to what they do. Because that's how you measure a person's content of character. Do their words align smoothly and steadily with their actions? And when you do that, then you know if the bulldog is going to bite most of the time. Most of the time, of course, because humans are only so predictable. Only so predictable. So back to the book here. Should you accept it, you will bear with you the assurance of my undiminished confidence, of my affectionate esteem, and of my sure expectation that you will be able to render services to your country not less important than those you could render at home. He also asked Cameron to recommend a successor. Cameron expressed his fervent opinion that his fellow Pennsylvanian Stanton was the best man for the job. In fact, Lincoln had already made his decision, but Cameron left believing he was responsible for Stanton's selection. In the end, each of the three men, Seward, Chase, and Cameron, assumed he was instrumental in Lincoln's appointment of the new Secretary of War. Wow. This is what you do. This is what leaders do. This is what good leaders do. They make others think that the ideas, that the success of the mission was their own, and the good ideas came from them. Right? And whereas, I'm thinking about Hackworth here from the book About Face, whereas Hackworth stumbled into the awe of his peers somewhat, though not entirely, Lincoln premeditated his resolutions, then have others think they contributed substantially. And this is how you build relationships, right? Now, you could say, okay, this is manipulation. And I mean, I guess leadership is manipulation in a way, but the difference in manipulation versus that's beneficial versus detrimental is what are the results on the people in this situation? What are the results on the people? Are Seward, Chase, and Cameron coming out of this thinking that they are not considered by Lincoln's decisions and the such? What's actually the result here? Is Lincoln benefiting himself while others are left in the dust? No, I don't think that's what's happening. The team is benefiting as a whole. And I actually had this moment recently where I'll try and cover this as serendipitously as I can, or as incognito as I can. But I had a beautiful moment of this recently, which kind of gives me hope that I'm capable of this in some sense, where I'm currently living with a roommate, and what we had to do was, so let me back up a little bit. I felt like there was an imbalance in household duties of cleaning and such. And I didn't speak right away on it because I didn't want to be rash. And I waited. And I waited over time to see that if things would change, if by leading by example that would help solve the problem, but that did not seem to work. I made a suggestion that we do something like use a calendar. And the roommate told me that he did not use digital calendars like Google Calendar, which is how I organize everything I have going on. And he said he prefers physical calendars. And I left out, I suggested that we use some big pieces of paper that we had, extras that we had lying around to draw a calendar. And he said, we're going to use a physical one because he prefers physical, that he would prefer a proper one, as opposed to a makeshift one. So I actually planned on getting that calendar in order for not to shove it in his face like, hey, let's do this, but just to have that, hey, let's get, we have this calendar now. I know you said you prefer these. So, here we go. We have one now. And then perhaps the idea would come up emergently as we have that conversation that we can use the calendar for that purpose. But anyway, I didn't end up getting it, and we talked about it, and he agreed with what I said. And over time, what happened as we started to think about all the things that had to be done, because of course you don't have to clean everything at the same interval. He said, maybe it would be a good idea to use Google Calendar with all these moving parts. And that was the ultimately gratifying part for me, because that was my original suggestion, is that we use Google Calendar. But, he stated his objections in the multiple ways he did. And it was the indirect route, and it was going about that situation in a way that, made him think it was his idea that said, it was him that said, this is something we should do. Even though it was in my mind what I did want to do. And that's ultimately so gratifying, because then the person is going to follow through with that plan and care more about it than they would otherwise. So it really is an important element of operating in a group, in an organization of some kind with others, So it's immensely helpful for you as you go through, as you conduct relationships, generally speaking. All right, and moving on here, back to the book. While his cabinet reeled in the aftermath of the Peninsula defeat, Lincoln was faced with the grim knowledge that the ultimate authority had been his alone. Nonetheless, as Whitman had observed following the debacle at Bull Run, Lincoln refused to surrender to the gloom of defeat. He unflinchingly stemmed it and resolved to lift himself and the Union out of it. When the battle was still ongoing, Lincoln had found the time to write a letter to a young cadet at West Point, the son of Mary's cousin, Anne Todd Campbell. The boy was miserable at the academy, and his mother was worried. Allow me to assure you it is a perfect certainty that you will very soon feel better, quite happy, if you only stick to the resolution you have taken to procure in a military education. I am older than you, have felt badly myself, and know what I tell you is true. Adhere to your purpose, and you will soon feel as well as you ever did. Which I think his words there are to say that hard work is synonymous with persistence. As he says, exhibit an unadulterated and impassioned adherence to the overriding personal purpose. Because we each know what it is within us we should pursue. Now, it isn't always readily obvious, and it may come to us later than we prefer, but it is that thing, and it is that thing. I mentioned Christopher Hitchens earlier, and I believe the way he puts writing for him is that it is not something he necessarily loves doing, though he certainly enjoys it, but rather he feels like he must do it, and he doesn't feel good when he's not doing it. So I think that's the sign that it is something you ought to be doing. And with that clarity, it doesn't come to all of us, but we're certainly hearing that sentiment here with what Lincoln is saying, that pick your thing and stick to it. And you know when you get to that thing. I think you know when you get to that thing. I've had multiple moments in my life where I did think I got to that thing, but after much time of thinking that this was my goal, I wasn't making progress on it, and I realized it wasn't because I was just lazy or undisciplined. It was because that was not what the thing was for me. And you need to have a strong why. That's part of it. You need to figure out your why for doing what you're doing, and that will propel you forward in your persistence on that goal. Back to the book here. For the soldiers, the need to communicate with their families was tantamount to their need to survive. Alcott had the story of a valiant soldier named John, a young man of commanding stature with a handsome face and the serenest eyes she had ever seen. A ball had pierced his left lung, making it impossible for him to breathe. Although the doctor seemed his condition hopeless, he clung to life for days, hoping to hear from home. Subdued by pain, he never uttered a complaint, tranquilly observing what went on around him. When he died, many came to see him, paying respect to the quiet courage that had impressed both the hospital staff and his fellow soldiers. While Louisa May Alcott stood by his bed, the ward master handed her a letter from John's mother that had arrived the night before, just an hour too late to gladden the eyes that had longed and looked for it so eagerly. I think what we can learn here from this wounded soldier that had just come back from combat, I think we learn to act yourself as the role model you wish others to be to you, and you will thus be so to them. An individual's weight is measured by the abundance of people he influences. So when you behave in ways that you admire, that means that you are acting on what you think is the utmost adherence to moral goodness as you can muster. And that is really saying something about what it means to be an operator in this world, just as a human being going around doing things. It really quite means something. And when you do that, when you follow that guideline, that principle, and you hold the line in that respect on your own, that's when other people will look at you and start doing and thinking the same thing. So that's why it's so important to live the life you want to see others living, because that is the only thing that will have them doing that. And that's the only way you'll be happy yourself, is if you come to accept that the hard things that you wish other people did for your benefit, you have to do those same things for theirs. And yeah, it's lovely. I want to mention something really quick, because this isn't a page that I have any annotations on, but I found this was pretty significant because it was something that I learned. So I enjoy writing with fountain pens, and I use them pretty much anytime I'm writing. I can't really remember the time I used anything other than a fountain pen. And one of the enjoyable things about fountain pens is that it's actually cheaper to use over time when you consider the cost of the pen and the ink and how long they last. But it's also, you get this customizability with the ink you use and the properties of the ink, including the color. And there is one ink by a brand called Noodler's. It is called the Noodler's 54th Massachusetts. And I learned about the 54th Massachusetts from reading this book, and I learned that it was actually based on this. And the 54th Massachusetts was the first Black Union infantry unit, which is interesting. I'll just read this real quick here, actually. The black soldiers who initially answered Douglas's call became part of the famed 54th Massachusetts Regiment. Captained by Robert Gould Shaw, the son of wealthy Boston abolitionists, the first black regiment from the North included two of Frederick Douglass's own sons, Charles and Lewis. So yeah, this is a pretty historical regiment here, and it's nice to see that there was some of that inclusion in the names of inks for fountain pens. So back to the book here, what we're here to learn for this highlight. As July gave way to August, however, Lincoln's thoughts never strayed from his proclamation. Repeatedly, he returned to edit his draft, touching it up here and there, anxiously watching the progress of events. Having resolved to present it for publication upon the first military success, he set out to educate public opinion, to prepare the ground for its acceptance. Lincoln had long believed, as we have seen, that with public sentiment, nothing can fail. Without it, nothing can succeed. He understood that one of the principal stumbling blocks in the way of emancipation was the pervasive fear shared by whites in both the North and the South that the two races could never coexist peacefully in a free society. He thought that a plan for the voluntary emigration of freed slaves would allay some of these fears, fostering wider acceptance of his proclamation. And this is, of course, the Emancipation Proclamation that he is working on right now. And similar in sentiment, I suppose, to your network is your net worth, is what's being expressed here. And as shown and discussed earlier in this very book, capture the hearts and minds and the flourishment which you planned shall arrive. So that's really what it is. He was taking his time here, making small pivots and adjustments in response to the current events, and he really wanted to fall in line with public sentiment, because that's something that I've heard talked about. It's something I've heard, again, Jordan Peterson say, where he talks about a successful business venture. And it's not just about the idea. You can have a great idea for something, but without the right marketing and preparation and otherwise care for it, you're not going to, it's not like your product is going to become super successful and you're going to become a millionaire. That's not exactly the case. It's not just because you have a good idea that it's going to get you far, because yeah, people have to know about it. You have to market it well. Is it at the right time? Is the market going to be receptive to this? Is this something that the market can handle right now? Is this something that lots of people need and that we can scale up and down? So it's not just about we have this great product. And that's kind of Lincoln's approach here. He says that, he thinks that he has this great product with the Emancipation Proclamation, but you can't just drop it on a population. Especially one thing that happened is that he wanted to at one point, but then that was followed by a Union defeat. So, of course, you don't want to be dropping anything like that after a major Union defeat. So eventually he did bring it back up after a great Union victory. And that was just the result of something well-timed. Now, right back to the book. Lincoln did not need any such confirmation of the historic nature of the edict. Fellow citizens, he had said in his annual message in December, we cannot escape history. We of this Congress and this administration will be remembered in spite of ourselves. No personal significance or insignificance can spare one or another of us. The fiery trial through which we pass will light us down in honor or dishonor to the latest generation. When Joshua Speed, which is his lifelong best friend, when Joshua Speed next came to visit, Lincoln reminded his old friend of the suicidal depression he had suffered two decades earlier, and of his disclosure that he would gladly die, but that he had nothing to make any human being remember. He had done nothing to make any human being remember that he had lived. Now, indicating his Emancipation Proclamation, he declared, I believe that in this measure, my fondest hopes will be realized. So this is the weird thing about Lincoln's personal and political life, is that although he was a man that was so capable of building and managing relationships over time, and also measuring and having come to fruition his aspirations and ambitions, he was also someone incredibly troubled internally. And I think this is something we can all relate to. And myself, I also feel this, is that, man, there's so much, there is that balance between living up to a reputation of someone who can be a good leader, as well as all these internal things going on. How much of this do you express to the outside world versus how much of it do you just kind of cast aside as not being a big deal? And how much of that trouble do you absorb for the greater good? Because, of course, you can't just let everything out at all times to everyone. That's not how it works out. So how is it that you go about that? And that was one of the problems, or not, I won't say problems, but one of the internal elements that Lincoln faced was this depression and this anxiety and this worry, this existential worry of becoming successful. And he wanted his name to go down in history for something, and that something was the Emancipation Proclamation. And I don't think I cover this, so I'll mention it now. It's actually funny. Well, it's not funny at all, but it was really, I think it was only days after. Yeah, it was days after his Emancipation Proclamation that he was at the theater where he was so famously assassinated, and it was like just everything that came true. about what he wanted. And I really hope I don't have this sticky highlighted, because I really want to mention it now. Though it comes a little while later. What happens when he's signing the Declaration of Independence, the Emancipation Proclamation for it to go out and be officially published? He was saying how he was sitting there about to sign the thing, and he was pausing. He was pausing because, and they were saying, hey, why are you, surely you're excited about this thing. Why don't you just sign the thing, get it over with already? Aren't you excited? And it was because of that nervousness and excitement, where he was sitting there with his pen, and he was waiting to calm down, because he said, if I hurry this thing and my signature looks sloppy, it'll look like I was hesitant at the last moment. If you're showing that hesitation and jitteriness in your signature, it's like, oh man, this is somebody who was going about this in a hasty manner, or isn't so sure about it. But when you got a nice, clean, smooth signature there with some nice thick lines that come out from that pen moving slower across the page, yeah, it's going to have an effect where you have that more confident portrayal of your belief in this thing. So I think that's a wonderful anecdote. And yeah, it really comes down to the littlest moments like that. Although I suppose that's one of the biggest moments also. And yeah, a lot of this book is something that I relate to, having, like he says, having done nothing to make any human being remember that he had lived. That is something that is on my mind in an almost perpetual manner, for better or for worse. And it makes me also, it drives me also forward. And really, as I say here in my sticky, I fear I hold sincerely. And one, this fear that he's talking about is one I hold sincerely, and one which guides much of my action. Whatever pernicious mentality you may ascribe the pursuit, the greater a person's memory lasts into the future, the bigger effect he must have had. The dead live on in the minds of the living. So that's really the motivation there is, they say that a person dies twice, when, the physical death of his body, and then the last time his name is said. And it's about extending that name in the future as far as possible, which perhaps is vain, but also has me continuing on in a way that makes me want to contribute to the lives of others as meaningfully as I can. Back to the book here. Lincoln remained at Army headquarters for only a few hours. Before leaving, he handed Hooker a letter expressing confidence in the continuing campaign. If possible, the president wrote, I would be very glad of another movement early enough to give us some benefit from the fact of the enemy's communications being broken, but neither for this reason or any other do I wish anything done in desperation or rashness. Lincoln made it clear that he stood ready to assist Hooker in the development of a new plan in action. As he had done so many times before, Lincoln withstood the storm of defeat by replacing anguish over an unchangeable past with hope in an uncharted future. And wow, that's like, again, what I was reading in With the Old Breed today about a leader's what a leader does, and how that is and one guy that the author Sledge was talking about in particular was one who maintained cheerfulness in any setting, even in the most desperate of times, maintained cheerfulness. And I think really every person appreciates that. Every person acknowledges when another has the capacity in a trying situation to to remain ahead of the curve when it comes to happiness or contentment in some sense. Maybe not even happiness and contentment. Maybe cheerfulness is entirely divorced from the two, because you can be cheerful without being happy. You can say, hey, things could be worse, so I'm grateful, versus I am at, ideal level of happiness right now. So they don't have to be the same thing. But what it really is acknowledging that the future could be worse and that we can enjoy the present. And enjoy the present. I think that's what cheerfulness is. And Lincoln's mindfulness has him acknowledge that acknowledge the past as an educational service to the future. That even if my estimation of him here is erroneous, the case is still that his regard and hope for the future overrides his lament over the past. And this is how change is manufactured. So when you are thinking about and planning for in an optimistic and in a way that you wish to be successful, you're, of course, still an acknowledgement and learning from the past. You're really positioning yourself in the best spot to create the best future you can. And that's what's necessary when it comes to making a significant change. That could be both within yourself. That could be in your situation, and that could be the case in the self, because we all have experiences from our personal pasts which inform our present. That's what our personality and behavior is a collection of past experiences and traumas. So it's about acknowledging what those are and seeing how they can inform a future that will be ultimately beneficial for us. Okay, back to the book. The president's letter garnered extravagant praise through the North. It is full, candid, clear, and conclusive, the New York Times affirmed. Even Democrats were impressed. While Edward Everett told Lincoln he could not have advocated Vallandigham's arrest, he considered the president's defense of the step complete. Supporters were thrilled. It is a grand document, strong, plain, simple, without one sparkle of tinsel or ornament. Stoddard enthused, yet dignified as becomes the ruler of a great people when the nation is listening to what he says. It should be printed in every northern paper and read by every citizen. In fact, Lincoln took every step to ensure that his words would shape public opinion. Printed in a great variety of formats, the letter eventually reached an astonishing 10 million people in their homes and workplaces, on isolated farms and in cities. And as the American people absorbed the logic of Lincoln's argument, popular sentiment began to shift. Now, this letter that he's talking about is actually a little bit into the lore of what's going on here. It was something that he, I think, I don't think he submitted to anything particular, but just released publicly, and then a whole bunch of publications got a look at. And I'm trying to see here what it is exactly, the letter that he sent out. But what I was learning from this whole situation in general was that he seldom actively conspires to shape and form, in this example, public opinion, and rather awaits the proper instance which acts as a vessel to carry his sentiment. Adroit, indeed. Thus, capitalize on the swing of each moment judiciously. Do not try to make them, and do not let them pass. So that's the balance that we're striking here, is that we can't is that moments throughout life aren't going to be forced. And when we're trying to make something happen, that is something that occurs as a result of our forthright effort on that front. But at the same time, there are so many underlying forces that you can't exactly control that that you have to rely on the fact that you can't control them. So you have to line things up as much as you can, and then really take faith that your prediction of the trajectory of your action is going to be in line with the reality of it. I think this really only comes, a person only becomes better at this from doing it more, and from trying to actually plan things and execute them according to plan. And the more often you do that, the more you realize how things can differ. And you get that much more experience, and that much more experience will help you with being with having those maneuvers go more smoothly in the future. So Lincoln was probably a man that as we can see, that planned a lot of his stuff going on and made sure that the actions of others were supporting his maneuvers. And they could have been people close to him that were actually doing work to progress that, or it could have been just like this, where he waited for the right time to release a certain letter that a lot of people in the North, 10 million people, were able to enjoy and take a look at. And thus setting himself up in the future, of course. So back to the book here. Lincoln was also confronted by continuing rumors of Grant's relapse into excessive drinking. So at this point, Grant, Ulysses S. Grant, he's doing some good fighting. Lincoln is relying on him. But yes, he was confronted by continuing rumors of Grant's relapse into excessive drinking. Tales of drunkenness were not confined to Grant. Elizabeth Blair heard that during the Battle of Chancellorsville, Hooker was drunk all the time, while Bates was told that General Halleck was a confirmed opium eater, a habit that contributed to his watery eyes and bloated appearance. In Grant's case, the gossip reached Lincoln by way of the puritanical Chase, who had received a letter from Murat Halstead. The respected journalist warned Chase that Grant was most of the time more than half drunk and much of the time idiotically drunk. In fact, Lincoln and Stanton had already heard similar complaints. After dispatching investigators to look into General Grant's behavior, however, they had concluded that his drinking did not affect his unmatched ability to plan, execute, and win battles. A memorable story circulated that when a delegation brought further rumors of Grant's drinking to the president, Lincoln declared that if he could find a brand of whiskey Grant used, he would promptly distribute it to the rest of his generals. So that's kind of the laissez-faire attitude you're getting from Lincoln, where people are trying to do Grant in for drinking on the job and being way too drunk way too often. But Lincoln was like, hey, this guy is getting the results we want. So if that means I gotta find this person's brand of alcohol that he drinks so we can bring it to everybody else so they can start doing the same job, then I'll do that. And that's the thing about Lincoln, is he was also very adept in his use of being comedic, using humor at the same time as answering a question, at the same time as dissolving it, which is really an incredible soft skill that, how do you get that? How do you get that? Is that just from practicing more often? What are you practicing? Talking to people and trying to please others, as well as look out for yourself and look out for the situation and the benefit of everyone as a whole? There is more than one or two factors at play there. So, yeah, it's it's really bizarre to think about how well he was able to balance all of these moving parts. And people have a potent proclivity to hate, but methods which work for the individual shouldn't be castigated, for the person earned greatness somehow. Now, of course, yeah, you can only go so far with this, because you can have someone that's just committing horrible things or has horrible practices, but it's working for them. No, that doesn't work in every situation. Like, you take someone like Steve Jobs, who of course achieved much throughout his whole time, but it was very commonly known that he did not exhibit the most tame behavior to the people working for and with him, and was quite demanding in that way. And so you can't take that perfectly. But it's something to keep in mind as often as you can bear and remember to. So back to the book here. Lincoln's counsel to Frank was echoed in a gentle letter of reprimand to another young man whose intemperate words made him vulnerable. Captain James Cutts Jr. had been court-martialed for using unbecoming language in addressing a superior officer and for publicly derogating his superior's accomplishments to the point where a duel almost took place. Young Cutts was the brother of Adele Cutts, Stephen Douglas's second wife. In remitting the sentence, Lincoln wrote, You have too much of life yet before you, and have shown too much of promise as an officer for your future to be lightly surrendered." He tried to impart some of the measured outlook that had served him so well. No man resolved to make the most of himself can spare time for personal contention. No man resolved to make the most of himself can spare time for personal contention. Still less can he afford to take all the consequences, including the vitiating of his temper and the loss of self-control. Yield larger things to which you can show no more than equal right, and yield lesser ones, though clearly your own. Better give your path to a dog than be bitten by him in contesting for the right. Even killing the dog would not cure the bite. Dang, like he just comes out with these bangers, and they're just straight up bits of exactly how to conduct yourself in challenging situations. What he's telling us here is that there are many instances in which something, you may want to crack down on something. There's a dog on the path, and it may bite you, it may get in your way, so you want to do something to deal with that dog. But what the matter might be is just avoiding the dog entirely in that moment. And even though, it's this element of you could get bit and you can retaliate, but you've already been bit. There is no remedy for that. But if you avoid that in the first place, then you're probably going to be better off. So I think so I reckon that's what he's getting to here, is this sense of, I suppose, pick your battles is what he's saying. Don't waste your time and energy and other resources on just stupid things. Something like a dog getting in your way and getting bit because you couldn't walk or will take a different path from this vicious dog. Don't waste your time and energy on that stuff. Essentially, subordinate the ego. Man trying to make the most of himself, also participating in his own tangents of emotion, must move forward in a way which allows his mind to wander through the woods, knowing he will only witness singing birds and no bears. So it's about taking this journey through conducting relationships and instances that's allowing you to see the better benefit in seeing the birds seeing them sing rather than getting wrapped up in these scraps from these land mammals. Like it's not okay to let yourself get wrapped up in this stuff, because that's only going to make you stoop to that level, and people will respect you much more, and you will respect yourself much more if you forego situations in which these quabbles really will. Like, how much benefit is this situation bringing to you? Think about it. Think about, is this something, if talking about this and getting to the bottom of this with this other person, is that really going to make this relationship any more open and clear and genuine? Or is it just going to breed some type of antagonistic relationship where, oh, now this person can't even tolerate this little thing that I do? He does all these annoying things and he can't deal with this one thing of mine. So I'd say for the majority of the time, you should give the benefit of the doubt to just dealing with that internally on your own, to not throwing it out there and making it a problem to consider, actually dismissing it as something that's insignificant. Now, this is a slippery slope. You don't want to be taken advantage of or just become someone who's entirely scared of confrontation. But you certainly want to measure yourself. Like my example earlier with the calendar, I showed patience over the course of a couple weeks, and with that resulted in the other person thinking of the idea which I originally wanted as their own, and thought that to be the best course of action. And it's really gratifying getting to there. So that's why it's important to stick to your principles, even when other people are advising to do something one way, but you have in your mind that you have this planned out in a way that'll work. It's really important to take the advice of others. There have been so many times where I've totally missed the mark on what would be an appropriate action, and others have brought me to the light of what would actually be a better choice in that moment. So you certainly need to stay open, but at the same time, man, your principles are there for a reason. Now, here back to the book. Herein, Sweat concluded, lay the secret to Lincoln's gifted leadership. So when you're opening the last paragraph of a chapter with that sentence, I think you're getting something good. So this is the secret to Lincoln's gifted leadership. It was by ignoring men and ignoring all small causes, but by closely calculating the tendencies of events and the great forces which were producing logical results. John Forney of the Washington Daily Chronicle observed the same intuitive judgment and timing, arguing that Lincoln was the most truly progressive man of the age because he always moves in conjunction with propitious circumstances, not waiting to be dragged by the force of events or wasting strength in premature struggles with them. So this is exactly what we were talking about a second ago, so I won't go on and on about it, but this is exactly it. He's not trying to force something when it happens. He's not letting things go to waste when they shouldn't. And instead, and says ignoring all small causes. So letting go the things that don't really matter and not getting caught up with them, but making sure that you're tracking events closely and seeing, how is this progressing? Am I able to do something? And this is what caused it, because I had someone over for several days before I had this conversation with my roommate about the cleaning, and maybe something about my unconscious knew that, hey, I have someone over. I'm spending more time and energy and with this other person. So it would seem a little out of the blue just coming up and talking about this. So what happened was that this person's stay expired. They left, and the first night that they left, me and him just sat around having a chat, and we're able to spend some of that time together, kind of feel like we were connecting more again, which I think made the following conversation a lot easier. And I think part of that is maybe building up some capital where instead of just, bum rushing out of nowhere after not talking with somebody for a while and saying, this is what's going down, might not turn out so well for you. So it was, I feel after that moment where we just chilled for a while, where it made it more comfortable to talk about it again. So it is waiting for those propitious circumstances to inform when it will be best to make such a decision. Moving on back to the book. So, while the bill to establish the new rank of lieutenant general was being debated in Washington, Washburn recounted spending 6 days on the road with Grant, who took with him neither a horse, nor an orderly, nor a servant, nor a camp chest, nor an overcoat, nor a blanket, nor even a clean shirt. Carrying only a toothbrush, he fared like the commonest soldier in his command, partaking of his rations and sleeping upon the ground with no covering except the canopy of heaven. Noting his preference for pork and beans, the New York Times speculated that caterers who had previously served the delicate palates of officers were in spasms. Everything Grant did during his 4-day stay in Washington, from his unheralded entrance to his early departure, was done exactly right, the historian William McFeely concludes. He was consummately modest and quietly confident, the image held for the rest of his political career and beyond into history. So that's quite a reputation to have, Grant here, and that's exactly how you do it. You live like the commonest soldier. You are modest and quietly confident, and that's how you gain the favor of others. And I feel like that's self-explanatory in and of itself. And it's you take figures then to figures now. You take Grant, you take Lincoln, you take Elon Musk. Leaders of tremendous prosperity never divorced themselves from the toils of the lowest, if you want to call it that, the lowest person dutifully carrying out the mission. So Grant was going around with just a toothbrush, just like every other soldier did. And Lincoln, what he did was he was always talking to the common person. This was back when security wasn't at, DEFCON 5 at all times for the president. And Lincoln and what presidents did at the time was let people into the White House, so it would occasionally be flooded from people living around the area coming on in. And Lincoln would shake everybody's hand and talk to them. So he never really divorced himself from just genuine interactions with everyday people. And I think that's what allowed him to be so close, have his ears so close to the ground, because he had perpetual interaction with the people for which he was making decisions and policies. And he was also making an impression. He was building that network of people that trusted him based on their interactions with him when they met, because that means a lot. If you're going to, let's say it's something as simple as you're going to buy a product and you're gonna go buy a computer, and you happen to meet somebody that works for Microsoft, and you have all of these computer manufacturers around, yet you had a random interaction at the grocery store with someone from Microsoft, and you say, hey, next time around, maybe I'll buy a Microsoft computer, because you're like, hey, I trust this person. It seems like he has his head screwed on right. And, you can count on other people at the organization being like that. So you know what? I trust this more. I'll get a Microsoft computer. And that's how it works. I mean, we make decisions based on familiarity. So it's certainly important to breed that familiarity personally, and also through making the right decisions, because he could go around talking to as many people as he wanted, meeting as many people as he wanted. But ultimately, if you're not serving them in a way that they please, if you don't have their hearts, as is so many times mentioned, then you're losing that game. And back to the book. Acutely aware of his own emotional needs, Lincoln had chosen exactly the right time to review the troops, for his conversations with Grant and his interactions with the soldiers sustained and inspired him during the troubling days ahead. Having hope, writes Daniel Goleman in his study of emotional intelligence, means that no one will not give in to overwhelming anxiety, a defeatist attitude, or depression in the face of difficult challenges or setbacks. Hope is more than the sunny view that everything will turn out right. It is believing you have the will and the way to accomplish your goals. And I just wanted to read that out of the context of the whole paragraph and getting just that, because wow, that is saying something about what it is to have hope. And that's why I think hope is such a tricky word. There's so many tricky words out there. Happiness is another tricky word that is kind of similar in the same genre as this, because we can think, oh, I hope this goes well, or I hope this turns out well. And what I think people should mean when they say, I hope this goes well, is not, oh, I hope the universe happens to ordain this in a way that makes this turn out favorably for me, but rather, I hope that my maximal efforts to have this turn out well does have it turn out well. That's what it should be. That's really what it should be. And I think many people, unfortunately, don't mean it when they say hope in that way. But I think that's the best way to think about it. Because when you frame your hope in that sense, with that your efforts will pay off, that means that there are efforts there in the first place, which means that you are considering the effect of your efforts. Thus, a hope must be uttered to testify in favor of a strong commitment to a more favorable future. Having hope is to say that the goal shall unmistakably be fulfilled despite the arduous journey which leads there. We must sustain that arduous journey. And moving on to the last thing we actually have to mention here. Back to the book. More than any of his other speeches, the second inaugural fused spiritual faith with politics. While Lincoln might have questioned the higher force that shaped human ends, as he became involved in matters of gravest importance, his friend Leonard Swett observed a feeling of religious reverence and belief in God, his justice and overruling power increased upon him. If his devotion were determined by his lack of faith in ceremonials and forms, or by his failure to observe the Sabbath very scrupulously, Swett added, he would fall far short of the standard. However, if he were judged by the higher rule of purity of conduct, of honesty of motive, of unyielding fidelity to the right, or by his powerful belief in the great laws of truth and rigid discharge of duty, his accountability to God, then he was undoubtedly full of natural religion, for which he believed in God as much as the most approved church member. So this is a really powerful thing to say, because this is talking about Lincoln, and this is talking about how he conducted himself, and that Lincoln is actually funny. I think this was maybe about a decade ago where this was said, and I forgot who suggested it. Maybe Richard Dawkins, something like this, said that there should be a presidential list where former presidents, after they've done their 2 terms and have no choice of no chance of going back in, can sign an atheist list and go back and actually say, okay, did you actually believe in God? Or was that something that you feigned to get through office? Because surely many presidents have done that. Not every single president in the course of the United States history has believed in God. or has been religious in general. And Lincoln never really had any full religious references. It was more using God, kind of like Einstein used it, where he just talked about the nature and the ongoings and the proceedings of the universe and how it acts so mysteriously. It doesn't seem like Lincoln was an incredibly religious person, but to have an incredibly religious person say that, yeah, by pure religious standards, he would be whack. However, if you take his purity of conduct, honesty of motive, fidelity to the right, understanding the great laws of truth, the rigid discharge of duty and accountability to God, like that is one of the most upright and fortuitous things you can say about a person. Like, wow, really wow. And should this not be the standard by which all people are judged? What's the significance of religious devotion if a person's moral scruples are highly esteemed? Right? So what does it matter? What does it matter how your religious orientation is aligned? And of course how that compares with how other religious people think you should be aligning your religious inclinations. And what does that mean about you as a person? And I think that is a great note to end here on for today's podcast is, who are you as a person? Do you have this desire to discharge duty to its proper magnitude? Are you doing that in your life? Are you doing it to yourself? Are you making sure that you are setting yourself up to be, as the Marines would call it, the eminently qualified human? Is that what you're doing? Or are you setting yourself up to be some substandard facsimile of what it means to be an esteemed contributor of your local and global community? Pray tell, who are you setting yourself up to be? Whether you, despite your religious or spiritual convictions, what does it mean to follow those convictions? And what does it mean to bring the best flourishment for all people around you? You want to really supply a supple flow of goodness into the souls of as many people you can meet. That's what Lincoln was trying with his Emancipation Proclamation. And he died doing it. Literally, somebody said that he's going to pay for this and then assassinated him. That's what happened with John Wilkes Booth. Is he was standing at this not at the Emancipation Proclamation itself, the speech, but an announcement later on of what was going on, where Lincoln was speaking on his White House balcony to a crowd about it that John Wilkes Booth was in, and he said an unsavory remark about Lincoln being so partial to this group of people in the country, and then said that's the last time he'll be able to, that's the last time he'll say something like that. And fortunately it became very true. But that is what we must remember. Despite any of the beliefs you have, what do your actions say? Because at the end of the day, one thing I very much disagree with is when people say, "Oh, yeah, they may be bad or they may be acting up, but they're good at heart." Good at heart means nothing to me, because your intentions could be one thing, but if good intentions constantly lead to bad consequences, what does that say about you? That you just have a completely false understanding of what how the outside world works, and you can't ever plan or prepare properly for what it means to have something good happen in that reality. So this idea of oh, they're good at heart doesn't track with me. What do your every day, every minute, every year actions and strategies say about your value to others and to yourself? Can you be defined in these ways? And that's about all I have for today. And I would say my parting piece of information, I suppose, to keep in mind is that through all of these things, through all of these readings, we learn about human nature. And one thing that I've learned about human nature and how to have the best impact on others around us is that we must understand others. And we understand others through familiarizing ourselves with more experiences, experiences and perspectives, which is done through reading. So remember that reading, and all things included, remember that literacy is a superpower. And with that, farewell.